Since the arrival of the first fleet in 1788, Australia has become host to an increasing number of feral goat populations. These feral goats can cause substantial amounts of damage to vegetation, increase the rate of soil erosion, threaten native and endangered species, compete for food with livestock, and act as potential carriers of livestock diseases. While in some areas of the world, feral goats are seen as a good source of food or are helpful with fire prevention, in Australia they are more commonly seen as a threat to biodiversity and areas of high conservation value, as well as a significant cost to the Australian government. In 1999, feral goats were identified as a key threat under the Commonwealth Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and in Queensland the feral goat was identified as a Class 2 animal under the Land Protection Act in 2002. Feral goats will often damage fences and infrastructure.
They usually go onto some of your best country,
Yep.
right? But the worst thing about the animal is they fence destroyers. Walk through them, tear through them, climb over them. For our type of fencing, which is mostly plain white cattle fencing, right? They're quite destructive.
What you're looking at, there's obviously an impact on fencing and infrastructure, goats being what they are, but you've got heavy grazing pressure. And not only the grazing pressure, you've got vegetative degeneration or the lack of regrowth, and you get soil erosion, and you just get situations whereby even the campsites can be denuding of all vegetation altogether, especially in the granity country where it's very, very frail, it just drops away.
The damage that feral goats can do to vegetation is one of the reasons why many conservationists are concerned. Many of the areas that these goats inhabit are areas of high conservational value, such as the Cumberland Plain woodland. Goats' ability to graze on many different surfaces and vegetations could result in the depletion of many native species of flora in areas of conservational concern.
The goats will just eat everything and anything that's available to them, so the grazing pressure from sheer numbers, especially big numbers, is enormous.
Feral goats are also a threat to some endangered species. In Australia, feral goat populations often come into competition with the native brush-tailed rock wallaby and the yellow-footed rock wallaby. This is especially common along the east coast of New South Wales, where the occurrence of brush-tailed rock wallaby sightings is greatest, as well as eastern South Australia, which is where the largest number of yellow-footed rock wallabies dwell.
We've got 2 colonies of brush-tailed rock wallabies, and I mean, at the end of the day, goats and brush-tailed rock wallabies are sharing the same environment for shelter and for food source. So if you've got the goats there, that's pressure on threatened species.
Feral goats are also potential carriers of many livestock diseases.
I do think that they could carry foot rot, foot abscess, lice, right? Not confirmed as far as I'm concerned, but any animal that comes in off someone else's property do carry something different to what you've got on your own place. If you're trying to keep it clean by vaccination and drenching and those sort of animal husbandry type things, they introduce something else different to you,
Then you've got the issues of stock diseases that potentially could be spread by goats. They could be anything as simple as foot rot, or you could have intestinal scenarios with worms. You could have leptospiridium. You can have you can have other zoonotic diseases that even humans could be getting from goats as well at the same time.
Despite this, feral goats are still only classed as a nuisance pest in New South Wales, and they are not viewed as being as destructive as other major pests.
Not as viral as a dingo or a pig or a cat. And cats and foxes and dingoes and that, they destroy your animals,
While the benefits of feral goats may seem few, California is using goats alongside hazard reduction burns as a method of reducing the risk of bushfires. However, it is still unsure how effective this actually is.
I wouldn't think it'd work. I mean, if you start releasing goats, what control have you got? And they'll eat everything and anything anywhere. It's not as if you can selectively say these goats will just work within a 2-kilometre buffer, which is a perfect buffer in the case of a bushfire, and they'll just graze this area down and keep the low growth right down to the bare minimum. They'll just spread around, you'll have no control of them, and then just add to the population that's already there.
At least $17 million has already been lost to the Australian sheep industry through competition between feral goats and domestic sheep. While the economic cost of goat populations is high, less obvious costs, such as cultural losses, are also evident. In Australia, this is usually restricted to the disturbance of Aboriginal heritage sites, which some Indigenous Australians once used for shelter or for rituals. The cost of culling feral goats is also great. While aerial culling is the most effective method, it's also the most expensive. Selling them for meat still remains the most profitable way of culling.
I certainly made dollars out of mustering these goats up that I initially did put on a truck and send away. It was quite profitable, but I was, I wouldn't say penalised, but I had to buy tags to put in their ears, right? Which is no incentive in respect to getting rid of a feral animal. We should be subsidised, or landowners should be subsidised in some degree to rid their places and properties of feral animals.
Where's the money going to come from? It's always about funds. People put their dollar where they best get the use out of it. So I don't know how that would work. It'd be nice to think that maybe there would be a pool of money there to divvy up. But I think if you're making funding applications as we do and other agencies do, and you can demonstrate that there's a benefit, and you can demonstrate that you're going to get results, that's probably as good as it gets. It's a very competitive field when it comes down to funding.
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be a situation where farmers or the community are going to be accessing individually funds to deal with them. There is an obligation under part of the Act for those certain pests, but those nuisance pests, it's voluntary.
Feral goat populations have a damaging effect on the biodiversity and agriculture of Australia, and the cost of feral goats to Australia is substantial, as is the cost of culling and maintaining populations. This culling is needed, however, so that further damage to biodiversity and agriculture can be avoided.